You can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. And the second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about education in general. So we'll get into that into the second hour. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the questions. Mitch, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. Our first question in from Paul Terry Wallace in Austin, Texas. LastPass has confirmed that cyber criminals stole its customers' encrypted password vaults, which store its customers' passwords and other secrets. In a data breach earlier this year, LastPass, you only had one job. Comments?
Good, John.
So I read the initial statement. I've read the current statement. I'm a LastPass customer. I'm not planning on changing that. They are, as I understand it, probably the largest password store commercially, and so they're the biggest target. If you've got a good, secure master password, I would change it. I wouldn't necessarily rush and change it right now, but I would change it this week sometime. I would also start rotating your passwords. But this is the world we live in. If you're going to use some sort of password manager in the cloud, they're going to be huge targets. The way LastPass has handled it seems to be the way that I would want a password manager to react to such a situation in such a breach. So they have my faith still.
Mitchell?
Best things you can do is to be preemptive about any of that and do exactly what John said, rotate your passwords, and never, ever use the same password for all of your programs and sources. It's just a bad idea. It's only a matter of when. And in this particular case, I don't believe that the encrypted information has been de-encrypted, but it's only a matter of time.
Yeah, so definitely, it doesn't sound like we're out in the open yet, but they're assuming that there's going to be an attempt to brute force the process, and I'm going to change I'm not going anywhere. Like I'm too embedded. I feel like this is usually these kinds of breaches. The chances of it happening twice very close together are pretty low because it usually creates a whole bunch of new rules. John, do we know? Did they say why or how it happened?
They had, and I'm not. You're asking me something to remember that I read quickly. So they did mention that there was a dev environment that they had, as I recall, and it was a cloud store. Their data centers where the stuff is normally kept is not cloud-based. It's local data centers that they have. And there was somebody got into the cloud version and got some encrypted backups or something.
And do we think that there was a human involved?
Yes. There have been people fired over this. Yeah, there have been people fired over this.
I mean, when I say that, generally, I've worked with a couple of red teams, and they get paid basically to break into other companies. They get paid by that company to break into the company and then tell them how they got there. And I said, "Who stopped you?" And he's like, "Nobody. Nobody's ever stopped us." So like he goes, no one's ever stopped us. He goes, "It's all just a matter of time. You just wear it down." And he goes, and I said, "Well, what's the easiest way?" And he goes, "People. People are the easiest way in. People will do things that will be easy for them." And and he goes, "Sometimes you break down one person, then another, and then another, then another, and you build up trust." He goes, and then someone in a quick day will make a mistake. And he goes, but you don't go right after the person you need the thing from. What you want is an email, from someone that they know coming to them, that seems innocuous to get something that you need. Go ahead, Mark.
So what's interesting about this is that you heard a lot about this in different media stories, but did any of the LastPass customers get an email from LastPass explaining exactly what happened?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we all got it. Yeah, so I don't know. I got it. I got an email about it. Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. Yeah, absolutely. John?
I was going to say, based on one of the things you were saying, that's the big thing that we do in cyber is education. There is nothing we can do. I can put up all the technology. I can put all the blocks up. But if I have one user that clicks on one stupid email, and I'm not calling the user stupid. They're not. These are really incredible. The ones that are done well, there are two types. There are those that are designed to weed out the smart folks. And then there are those that are designed to target the smart folks. And those are incredibly realistic. And I've almost been hit several times by those. So just be careful.
And this isn't, what hit, what most likely hit, this company is not a phishing operation where they kind of do an email that's kind of right. This is a group of people thinking really hard about one thing, and people who are smart at doing it. So this is going to happen. I think that is the case. Go ahead, Mitchell.
I was just going to give a tip. One of the best ways to avoid a phishing scam is if you get a note from your bank or your credit card or one of your utilities, never, ever, ever type the link that's in the email. Always go out to your account directly on the internet and log in like you normally would. That eliminates the possibility that they were pretty sophisticated in how they did it. But if you look at some of those very appropriate, very convincing emails they get, they look right, they've got the right logos and things on it. But if you ever check the links, it's generally not the link to the power utility or whoever it is that's doing it. So be careful out there.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that that I am constantly trying to do is educate people around me. So mostly my kids' teachers to not copy everybody. Like there's a blind CCs are a good thing, and let's not send everybody's email to everybody else. I try to explain to them that's like coughing in the middle. Now that we have all this COVID, I can say this is like coughing in the middle of the room. Like you're connecting everybody together so if anybody's email goes down, it affects all of us, and so it gets caught up in this. Go ahead, John.
So I was reviewing their blog post, and I was incorrect. It wasn't a employee, although I do believe some employees did get released from this. But it was they had a security incident in August, and they used credentials that was cracked during that breach to grab the data from this breach.
Got it. So it was a cascade, and that's that's always the danger. The good news is, if you use LastPass, I've been using LastPass for a long time. If you use it the way I use it, I will. It's not that hard. As I go to new sites, I'm just going to say I want to update my password, and it'll do it all pretty automatically. And I just have it build hashes. I don't know. I have to admit, I'm very dependent on LastPass. There's only a handful of sites that I have that I can type in. Otherwise, I just need to type into LastPass and get it in. So, but it'll be interesting. All right, let's go to the next question.
From Graham Cardwell in Belfast, Northern Ireland, thinking about replacing my action cam. Have all the GoPro style mounts, etc., but wondering about a DJI Action, Oslo Action, or Pocket. Any thoughts? And Merry Christmas to all at office hours.
I don't know that many people who have actually. So I've heard a lot of good things about the DJI action cams, that they're the future. And one of the things that GoPro is having trouble with is just that they're having lots of operational issues. So they haven't built, in my opinion, a solid camera since about 6 or 7. Like they just keep on trying to add features. The last one I think I bought was a 6, and it was like, oh, it's okay, but they didn't fix the underlying problems with the GoPro, which is the interface, the stability, the heat dissipation. All those things still seem to be problems that are getting worse, not better. So I think GoPro is in a kind of a complicated situation. The Pocket, I believe if I were going to get one and I was already using GoPro stuff, I think I'd probably lean towards the Action. I think the Action is going to be the Osmos, and the Pocket, I believe, have the gimbal. And I think that the Action is probably the one, if I'm correct. But that's probably the one I'd probably look at. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas, asking, is there any monitor to rival or even come in a close second to the Guy Cochrane extolled LG? Here we go. LG 43 UN 700B 43 inch.
The quad.
The thing. Yeah. It has all kinds of stuff on it. It's $546.99 at Amazon for screen picture-in-picture.
Go ahead, Mark.
So these are great monitors. I haven't come across anything that's better than them for splitting into 4-way very easily. The only thing I would say is I wish they'd make a little bit larger ones so the multi-views would show up a little bit bigger when you're using them in that format. The one downside I've found is that when you start to use multiple inputs at the same time, sometimes the things will only connect to them at 30 hertz. So that can be a downside. For most of the stuff I'm using it for, it's fine.
Are you, and how do you control the switch from 4 to 1 or How do
So
you
it's all built into the, I don't have it right next to me, but
bezel? There's no remote control capability, though.
No, it's just right in the clicker.
Okay.
So in the clicker, like a PIP button, there's a button called PBP, PIP, and then a menu pops up, and you just tell it tell it the routings and how many you want. You can go to 2 vertical, 2 horizontal. You could do 4, or you could just do 1.
Got it. Yeah, I don't think you're going to find anything at that price point. You can also, the only other thing to look at is there's lots of quad. There's a lot of tools that are made by everyone from Monoprice and others that will take 4 HDMI inputs, and then you can just hit buttons and go from one to the next for a couple $100. And so you can turn any monitor into a quad using one of those tools. And sometimes they actually have a better performance than what's in that monitor. So the 43 is actually kind of a difficult size for me. I don't know what to do with that. So, although I have thought about building, the one thing I looked at with that monitor was building it out as a teleprompter, so I'd be able to very quickly switch between different inputs that were going into it and go into a quad or whatever, and just do a maker pipe kind of project. And we've done really big ones. We had the biggest teleprompter that we did the biggest teleprompter was about 70 inches, but the second biggest one that we used regularly was a 55-inch, and it was a 55-inch monitor that literally just came out of a case. Just rose out of a case. We vacuum packed a 920 at the time, a Logitech 920, right into the glass, right behind the glass. And so there wasn't any, real telepromptery stuff on the back end. It was just that monitor there, and it was really effective. And so, big ones are really cool. And the little one that I'm using right now, I'm using a little iCan, isn't enough. I kind of get some eye contact with it, but it's not big enough. So I'm looking at building a bigger one that I can use. Go ahead, Mark.
So the one thing I would say about the 43 inches that we have a lot of them at that size for the engineers and architects, because once you go over that size, it just becomes a stretch. You start to have to move your head back and forth. 43 and below seems to be within the peripheral vision of everyone, so you can still use it to draw on. The idea about using it as a teleprompter is great, because now you could have 4 different bits of information. You could have a clock, you could have the multi-view, you could have any notes that you're trying to send to the person.
Yeah, so I think it'd be good for some settings. I think the problem you'd end up with having is that at times you wouldn't be getting eye-to-eye contact, because the camera would theoretically be right at the crosshairs of all of those monitors. So you might be looking a little off, but it would get the eye contact pretty darn close. Next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael. I've heard of LiDAR scans used to pre-visualize stage designs for concert tours. Would you use an iPhone 14 Pro Max with RealityScan, or would you use a Leica or similar device?
Leica. So the stage is too big. You're walking around and you'll get errata. This is the 360, the BLK 360, and this would be the starting point. So for smaller stages and venues, you could probably do it with this relatively effectively. And this is just, it's not, I say it's relatively inexpensive, but at the retail on this is 20 grand. And so but this is the starting point of what you would use at a venue. And I use these at venues. The reason I own this is to go to venues. So I go to venues with this and I scan out that space. I know that it doesn't have to be, I'm not doing architectural level scanning. I'm pre-vising a location that I have to be within plus or minus an inch or two. I'm not typically building into a building or laying out rebar or doing anything else like that. I'm literally, I just need to know where my truss is going to go. So this is effective for that. Sorry about that. The ones that you're going to start using when you're doing real production are going to be things like the Faro 350, the ZNF. Those are going to be they have much longer range. They're much more accurate, and in some cases faster. Or the bigger Leica. That Leica makes another one of these that's faster and more accurate than these. Go ahead, Mark.
So we really wanted to get into this and bring it in-house, but we found that the cost of the equipment, you end up having to go rent it, because you just can't. In our business model, we can't afford, the clients just won't pay us that additional money to do it that way. They want us to pull the tape measure and go measure everything. The one thing about trying to do it with an iPhone we found was not so much the walls might be too far away, because you only get accuracy up to about 12 feet away with an iPhone, but we found that it was the ceilings. You'd literally have to, if the ceilings are any more than 15 feet high, you're just going to lose it. So what we do is end up going to a service and having the service do it because they give us the BIM model, and that just seems to work a lot more efficiently for us.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
That Leica, I guess it was a Leica you were holding there, Alex. How does that? How do you manage that when you're doing your scan? Is that a handle on the top of it?
No. This is just the carrying case, which is really. There are parts of it that are really well designed, and parts of it that are horribly designed. Like you just keep on going, who thought of this? So this is. So you take this off, and so you find a place to put it. This is what it looks like here, and it has a special receiver on the bottom, and you put it on a tripod, and you just set it on that tripod. You lock it onto the tripod, and then you. In the next week or two, I'm going to do a after hours where we just go scan something, so you'll get to see it. So we'll stay tuned for that. But and then you just push this little button and it starts to go. Now you can control it from an iPad. An iPad, it has a Wi-Fi thing, and you can control it with an iPad. I never do because it takes too long. So I get it settings set up on the iPad, but then you just push the button and just keep moving. That's the upside. It's really fast and easy to cover a lot of space, and you don't need anybody with any technical skill.
How much time does it give you to get out of the shot before it starts scanning?
You got a couple seconds, and remember that as long as it's not pointed right at you, it only sees one plane at a time. So if it's sitting sideways to you, it's going to take a while before it gets to you. It's not.
Yeah, we see you going.
Yeah. You don't worry about it, or you just stand. Sometimes I just stand there and I just stand on the blind side, on a blind side, and I just stand there and go around it. Especially if you're in a place that you're afraid there'll be wind or there'll be someone might come and run and grab it. You tend to just stand next. You can stand right next to it. It's not a problem. And then it takes about 5 minutes per scan. And so the real painful part of that scanner specifically is most scanners just save it to an SD card. This one scans it to an internal drive, and then you have to use the iPad to pull those scans off one at a time. And it's 3 or 4 minutes a scan to pull it off that little guy. And the software, we used to use Recap to do it, which was much easier. But the software now to do it is this goofy, I don't know, some goofy software that someone wrote, and it is horribly buggy and really you're just so that's why I own it. I was able to buy it used from someone who just couldn't take the software. just I can't do this anymore. Because when they started it, they had this great partnership with Autodesk. Evidently that ended, and so they have to have some way to do it, and they have this external party do it, and it's just a disaster, and so that's the downside, and there's not really any other way into it that I know of, and then you'll end up bringing it back into Recap to realign everything, to make it all work. And so as for what I bought it for, and as a quick way to grab onto venues, it's great. It does it. I could never afford, as Mark was talking about. These Pharaohs start at, I don't know, 30,000-35,000, and go up. From there. And I have a friend who has a Pharaoh, who owns one. And Mark, you should talk to him because he's now he just sold his company, so he's thinking about what he's doing.
Love to, yeah.
Yeah. We should put you guys together because he's. He has a Pharaoh and he knows what to do with it. so he's probably one of the top surveyors in the world. And so anyway, so and we're going to get him onto office hours to talk about LiDAR. So stay tuned for more conversations. I'm hoping to get him on next month, but it's just him settling his schedule after he is gone freelance, so to speak. Anyway, next question.
Bob Sturdivant from San Antonio, Texas is in with this question. Has anyone used LiDAR photogrammetry to build a 3D model of a stage and then print it out with a 3D printer for a presentation? If so, what size is big enough to use for planning, since the printers are still so slow? Do you feel it was useful?
So we've definitely printed out things that we haven't printed out whole stages, but we've definitely printed out, like, we're going to do this little studio, and we'll scan that out. And a lot of times, we'll scan, it's a mixture. We'll scan the space so that they recognize the space, and then we will put the set into it, and then we've printed it. Now, I admit that most of the time we printed it no bigger than, I think, 10 inches, because that was the size of our scanner. Our scanner could do 10 inches. And so that was we just want to do it all in one piece. We did think about the potential of printing it out in pieces and then putting it back together, and it just felt like it would take, as you said, too long. Printing the set overnight was a day, or 14 hours, I think was this print time. So that wasn't too bad. The thing that I think is more interesting that we have done also, and one of the reasons I got the scanner to do more of it is doing virtual walkthroughs. So the other thing that we've done is used. We actually use gears. This was a while ago, but the Samsung gears for a long time to basically allow you to walk around inside of a space, or look around in a space. That is far more effective because you really get it at your size. Like you're looking around and you can put a set in there, you can put designs in there, you can make them look like it, and they feel like they're standing in the middle of the room or the front of the room or the back of the room, and they can make a lot better decisions. I think that when people design theaters, they don't sit in the front seats when they then they'd realize that no one should sit down there. Now, go ahead, Mark.
So you really have to put this in perspective. When we started doing rendering walkthroughs that would take 2 minutes for a presentation to try and win a project, they would take a week to render. It might take 2 or 3 weeks to build them. So if you're coming at from that historic perspective, it's just going to take a while for these things to print. And we print out sections of them. It takes overnight to print a section, and then you kind of glue or Velcro these sections together so that the client can see. You take the roof off, they see inside the building. You may take the second story off or the third story off, and they can start to see the layers of the building. You just have to plan for it months ahead of time.
In one of the companies that I worked with in the past, they actually had an open room. And this will sound crazy. I think it was about a 30 foot by 30 foot, so 10 meter by 10 meter roughly room that you could walk around in, and they were using the HoloLenses, for that, and you could kind of move around a little bit in there, and they had it all set up, and they were showing construction sites that had been scanned, and some of these construction sites were getting scanned every week, or I don't think it was going any faster than that, but they could walk through. And they could overlay their designs with the as-built, so that they could see if it was going the right direction, because they're making they had a lot of construction sites all at one time. so that was something that's kind of interesting. So I think that you can do a couple different things there. Next question.
Talalek Lopez Waterman in Norfolk, Virginia. I've been turning the Stream Deck Plus into an encoder for moving lights with the ETC EOS. Here's where I am stuck. Is it possible to receive OSC data in the BitFocus companion? It does not see the generic OSC has. It does not seem that the generic OSC has this option. Is there another way?
I don't think that I don't have a direct answer for this one, but I think that what you want to look at is, a linkage. So the temptation is always to have, and it gets tricky, but it's the same way we use the ATEM, is that you find something that will talk to the ETC, you find something that's going to talk to, and it's probably not a direct OSC connection for this. You got to find some piece of software that's going to be a translator. I'm going to get this, like for instance, we might use Touch OSC for other things, not this, but to grab onto MIDI, data and put it back into OSC. And so I think that there may be some ways that you could find a piece of software in between. But I feel like Pollock would have already thought of that. So he's asking us a question there, but that's my guess. Next question.
Next question in from Lois Richter in Davis, California. USB means universal, right? How and why did USB get created? 2, what versions have existed? What do they look like and what are they called? And 3, is it safe to plug an older plug into a newer port? I always thought if it fits, it's safe to use.
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, Wikipedia has a pretty comprehensive entry for USB and a lot of contributors to it. Right now, there's 14 different kinds of connectors, and I think of the people on the panel here are probably like me. You have a whole box of these things, many of which are suspect, even they've worn out. There are about 4 generations of USB, but it was originally created to have a universal standard everybody would adopt. And then, of course, as with everything tech, the marketing guys said, well, we have a unique case and we need a different kind of connector. And then they would convince people to have cables that are built for those unique connectors. For instance, on little handy cams for your average person doing movies for home movies, the cameras were so tiny that you needed a tinier connection, and putting the big block in there was just a waste of space. So over the years, since 1996 when it was invented, or at least agreed to, a lot of USB has been used, but now we have so many versions of it, 4 iterations of its capabilities. When they started putting power through it, that complicated things quite a bit with regard to data transfer and all the rest. And every time we had an outing from 1 to 1.5 to 2 to 3 and now 4, we're getting faster speeds. The chips inside them that do the processing for data are much more efficient. And even there's encryption starting to be put into these things. So it was meant to be a standard, but as with everything in tech, it depends now on what kind of USB you're doing. Now, you asked about, can you plug an old cable into a newer port? And yes, you can. You'll only get the capability of the cable itself, not the port. So for instance, we're all at USB-C now, which is often referred to as 4. You can get a lot through a USB-C connector, but if you had the big 4 block from USB 1, it's not going to fit, so you're safe there. But if you have a USB 1 connection, you put a USB 2 or 1.5 cable into it, it'll operate like a 1. So they deprecate kind of nicely. But now, of course, with competing standards for video and audio through these things, it's now going to be USB-C 5 pretty soon. So it's going to get even more complicated. So it's still safe to put a newer plug into an older port, but the versions may never stop. USB is not universal.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, common error is a USB-C and a Thunderbolt. And the way to tell a Thunderbolt from a USB-C, they look almost identical, is if it has the lightning bolt on it. I'm holding my hand so you can get a focus on it. There it goes. And this case, it's an OWC, and it says 4 on it, which means Thunderbolt 4. But a USB-C could look just like that.
And I think the multiple formats of this is really underlines the absolute insanity that they were made a standard for the EU. It was just like, we're going to take something that doesn't really work, and oh, by the way, it's really old, and everyone's already kind of moving to it anyway, just to kind of just tie up all the loose ends. And then we're going to now make it law, so that now we can't do anything new. It was just people who don't, digital children should not be making laws. It's like running around. It's like running around with knives. Anyway, next question.
Sorry. Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas. The Logitech Brio has a ludicrous removable mount. How do you get it off? Has the Insta360 Link knocked the once lofty Brio and the HuddleCam HD off their thrones as best-of-class webcams?
Go ahead, Mark.
So yes, what Paul's talking about in this image here, if it's on the screen, is a rubber mount that is pushed into a 1/4-20. So you really have to give it a good tug to separate the two, and then you'll be able to use the 1/4-20 that's on the bottom of that camera.
I do not understand why they didn't just make a rubber, like something you could screw in and out. It just seems like Dave.
Well, yeah, and I'll answer the second part of that question, and that is that I believe that the Insta360 is actually just leading all the other manufacturers in a certain direction. The 360 with its capability of snapping to other shots, to be able to have it follow you around and also take signals through the software. And as you often mention, Alex, being able to sort of drive the thing from a second monitor is taking all of the webcams, throwing down a challenge almost to them, that there's more capability you could build into these things, not just better picture. And maybe if real zoom lenses were added to these things, then they'd be ubiquitous. We wouldn't have to have huddle cams or all these other models. There'd be 1 or 2, and they all work pretty much the same way.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see where they go, with where they're at. I think that, I don't know if they need to change the lens right now, but what I'd love to see is a 1-inch sensor and an HDMI output. If they just did that next, like the next step, mechanical zooms is a thing. Like it's not Like that would be really hard to do affordably, but
and they're heavier too. Yes.
Yeah, but I think but just adding that little bit and making $100 more would be worth it. I mean, or even, if even if it would, even though there's other cameras at $500, one that looked like that would probably take over because of the utility. And now the big thing is that what we'd hope to see is some kind of API, which we are going to at the beginning of this year in mass requests from them. So, but I will say that they are. I will say that unequivocally, that's the best web camera under $500. Like it is. If as a web camera, USB web camera, it is the best. I bought 3 of them at retail.
It would be nice to have a little mini HDMI on the back. It wouldn't be that much in terms of taking space, but would it make it a hotter camera? Would it have to process more for HDMI?
I don't know if it would. I think that the main thing is that it would tie into all these other things that we're doing. It's just a little bit of a cluster to try to get it connected, get 3 or 4 of these connected to a computer. You want a switcher at some point. And it seems like that would be, but again, I don't know what they're going to do, but I don't think it'll make it that much hotter. I think that it would just size issues, cost of materials. You always have to remember that you take the cost of material and you got to multiply it by like 5 of like, that's how much it's going to add to the retail and end product. And so that's the other, I mean, that was this little side note. That was the trick to FireWire. It was that Apple was part of the consortium that developed FireWire. They put it into all the computers. They got all the camera manufacturers to adopt it, and then they pushed a $2 per unit royalty cost. Now, people thought that Apple was insane because what it did is it increased the cost of a PC by $50 if they wanted to add FireWire. And the problem so then no one did it. But what that meant was if you were an AV person, you had to buy a Mac because you couldn't, and that was Apple's intention. So was not to get PC manufacturers to pay them. It was to get them to not install FireWire, so that they could own that market. Go ahead, John.
So there is one thing the Insta is missing that I kind of need as a security professional, and the Brio has, and that's an infrared sensor. It's missing that, and that makes it less useful for my job. Because I'm having to set up authentication for users using facial recognition, and you can't do that with the Insta. You can do that with the Brio.
Interesting. I didn't even know you could do that with the Brio. It's an interesting feature there. Yeah, I didn't even know that existed. So that's good. That's interesting. So it's and how do you get access to the infrared in the Brio?
You just turn. So if you've got a computer with Windows Hello, it will use you just plug in the USB and it automatically syncs up. It knows it. It's there.
Interesting.
It's shines a little red light. It scans your face and then unlocks the computer.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
That's awesome.
Yeah, very cool.
Been my deep dive the last couple of months trying to figure out how to make that work.
Right. Yeah, but to get back to Paul's question, yeah, I think that right now the Link is the one to beat, and hopefully we're going to see companies compete with them, because if we get to see a little bit of an arms race here, now those things take a long time, but it's definitely pretty amazing. Next question.
Craig McFarlane from Boston, Massachusetts asks, what can be learned from the way Reddit does AMA sessions to improve office hours with Mukana?
I hate the way Reddit does AMA sessions. So like they just I can't go to them. They make me so upset. So I don't know if I don't know how much we'll learn from it. If you have suggestions of things that you like from it, maybe I'm missing something. But I have and I'm probably just too old for it. I go into Reddit every once in a while, but it doesn't take me very long before I get irritated enough that I leave. So I don't know if I'm maybe I should be paying more attention to it, but it's given me a lot of ideas. It's given me a lot of ideas for Mukana, but not in a way that I'm going to take things from it. It mostly tells me what I don't want to do. So yeah. Anyway, but if you think that there are things that are better, definitely let us know. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace is back from Austin, Texas, asking, explain how OpenAI's ChatGPT is taking off like a rocket ship. How do we keep up?
Go ahead, John.
ChatGPT has really been a masterclass in marketing and low-end disruption this year. They came out with a good enough product that the current incumbents can't match. Google can't just put out a chat product because they're dependent on ad revenue, and whatever they put out needs to be accurate enough that billions of people will rely on it, and ChatGPT is good enough. They time the market during a slow news part of the year so that people have plenty of time to play with it and use it. They created a product that triggers all the reward centers in your brain, that the novelty center as well as your dopamine to give you a quick hit when you do use it. So it's fun to use. And they made it easy and normal for regular people to start playing with AI, which is something that, the DALL-E image generators and that sort of thing just haven't been able to do. And all that together just makes it super viral.
Yeah, go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I think there are much better versions, just they're not going to be available to the public. They're available at a price, and they're controlled, and they don't necessarily need the publicity. But I think this solution particularly created the opportunity. I think they did a great job at commercializing it and getting people's interest in it. I will tell you one of the things that I think drove this was fear. I think this was that's what makes it such a great news story, because everybody's scared of what this was going to be, and this to some extent proved everything. But I think there are plenty of good options out there if you're willing to pay. They're just doing the free to create publicity for them.
There you go, John.
I'm going to tackle I think what John and Nigel has said has been good for addressing the first part of the question. The second part of the question is, how do we keep up? And I don't think we do. I think we tread water at this point. Unless you're an AI researcher, or I even don't like the term AI. It's machine learning at this point. I really think that unless you're engrossed in that 24/7 as part of your career, you're not going to keep up. My thought is you just enjoy it. Find what works for you and use it. I like ChatGPT because I can have it write me incredibly interesting stories about plots and characters I care about. So that's what I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
It's interesting to see how people are using it and what they're asking it to do. And I'm sure those metrics exist out there. But what John just said, the idea that it can write a story, that's what I think is capturing people's minds, because everybody wants AI. It isn't really AI. It's a search engine, but it's a clever adaptation of it.
And they do have a script writing one that was announced yesterday. So that is coming out, where they're playing around. It's designed to work with the script writers. It's not ChatGPT, but it's based on the same technology. And so you're going to see more of that. I just to give you a sample of some of the ChatGPT stuff, and because we're talking about AI, we've got a little time this morning now. I will say that I find like Midjourney is really fun. Like I really enjoy it, and like I have been making, just as an aside. I people have seen me play around with Midjourney. Like let's see, this is Minions in Roman times. So I asked for Minions in Roman times. I put Minions. This is fine. I got something completely different. I started making Santa Claus things for Christmas for everybody. So this is Santa Claus. I tweeted this out. But I'm from Pittsburgh, so I said Santa Claus as a Steeler. I got something completely different. And the reason I show you this is that this is really a lot of where someone had asked. We were doing this in after hours of crossing the Delaware with Minions. The main thing is that all of these things are really, really great for enjoyment. And what you want to do is learn how they work and where they're going to be useful for you. Exactly what was said before. I play with them a lot. I put in, right when you asked this question, I asked ChatGPT, I said, ask 10 questions about HDR, make up the asker name and location. Like literally just make it up. And it says, hi, I'm Chloe from London, and I'm trying to decide between an HDR and non-HDR monitor for my computer. What are some key differences between the two that I should consider before making my decision? Or, hi, I'm Rachel from Singapore, and I'm trying to decide between a TV. That's the same, but it talks a lot about monitors. It's decided that, can you describe the difference between HDR and Dolby Vision? It's asking, questions that could definitely be used, and it just adds the names and puts it all together. Now, it's not something we're going to use for this because we've got plenty of questions, but it is something that when you think about a producer sitting there for a show, when you do TV ones, what you don't realize, they write most of those. Producers write most of those questions. so and so being able to sit there, and I was just thinking about being able to sit there in ChatGPT and just drive out 100 questions, pick out the ones you want, stick them in, saves the producing assistant a lot of time. Go ahead, John.
Oh yeah, thank you. I forgot what I was going to say. My apologies.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
We should do a show where the ChatGPT does the question asking, and then we have another ChatGPT that does the answer, and we just sort of sit back and watch what happens.
We should do that with one of these. Yeah, absolutely. It's dueling ChatGPTs. I have had ChatGPT. I say, describe how this would look, and it gives me a long description. And then I cut and paste it and put it into Midjourney, and it gives me an image. And so you can do it. And then most of my cooking right now is an experiment. Most of my cooking has been driven from. So I haven't gotten around to the Manhattan clam chowder, but I had it make me a rainy day soup, and I made osh soup. And I just keep on asking ChatGPT, just give me a recipe for this, and it just gives me a recipe, and I go make it. And so far, it plays it safe, but it's been right on. I usually, the only thing I change in the recipes, I usually put a little more spice into it than what it does. It's playing it safe. Go ahead, John.
I would encourage everyone to not just play with ChatGPT and these sort of tools, but try to figure out what's something in my job that I can ask this computer to do in a way that I can describe it clearly enough for the computer to generate it. And then you'll see how it works in some of its limitations, something that you've already mastered yourself especially. I recently asked it to build out a training scenario for our call center, and it did a really great job. And in 15 seconds, I had it publish out something that would have taken me 20 or 30 minutes. I had to change 3 sentences on it, and then I sent it out to the team and said a robot did this.
And that's and this is a one of the key things is it's really important. The first thing I do in chat, I probably do it a couple times a day, is I ask it questions about things I already know the answer. And because the reason I'm doing that is I'm calibrating how accurate it actually is, because it's actually not accurate all the time. And that's what makes it dangerous, is that if you take it as, it actually knows what this is, it doesn't. And so you'll, by searching things that you already know very well, you'll see the cracks in what it does. And so then you can take everything with a grain of salt. So it handing you something right now is not particularly accurate. It's going to get a lot more accurate. It's going to, the big exciting thing about this is it's shortening the distance between when you think of something and when you can create it. And I think that that's going to be really fascinating. People being able to, we've talked about it before, and we're going to talk about AI next week for an hour. And we're going to keep on talking about once a month, because we have to pay attention. I've never seen a technology kind of suddenly just stand up. What happened is all these folks, I think, have been working on this for a decade or more, and they were afraid of putting it out. And Midjourney and OpenAI started running down the field. So all these people that have all this research now are getting forced to just start releasing it, or they're going to fall behind. Like, you look at Midjourney. I don't know where DALL-E is right now, but Midjourney has 6.5 million members in their Discord. And I will argue that the only reason they got there was because DALL-E delayed their release to the public. So as people saw DALL-E and DALL-E 2, got really excited, but couldn't get access to it. And then just people like me just went straight to Midjourney and so I'll pay for it. I want to play with this. And I think that was that's what happened there. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to lean on the last part of the question. How do we keep up? As with anything that sort of is unknown and mysterious and how it operates, we're cautious about adoption, and we're cautious about what use it is in our daily lives. And right now it's fun and it's interesting, and as Nigel said, a little fearing. And I think back to when microwave ovens first came out. Some people were quite afraid of them because it was mysterious how it did what it did. Magical. And it wasn't until manufacturers of food started packaging whole dinners or putting things in a way that would accommodate a microwave oven, people began to become more comfortable with it. And then, of course, our lives changed and became faster, and we needed to keep up by having microwave ovens to fill in the gaps. I think chat is an example, and it's going to get integrated into software, and it'll be more and more invisible after we've learned to come to terms with it. But I'm with you. Every month we should actually have some sort of discussion about where it's having an impact, and just keep abreast of what's going on, because that's the way that we understand everything, little by little.
and the way to not do it is probably to resist it. Like sit there and go, this is not going to work, or I'm not going to be part of this, or I'm not going to like that usually doesn't work very well, because the chances of it getting slowed down are pretty low. There's a certain level of inevitability, because there won't be enough regulation coming out that will slow it down to enough, like it's when Napster came out, it was never going to be the same. Like there was no way to put that, once someone, Nick mentioned it. Yeah. Once you open up a Pandora's box, there's no putting it back into the box. You have to figure out what you're doing with it. And, I've jumped from one industry to another every 2 to 3 years for my entire life. Like I literally have just done a different thing, and I just look at it going, okay, what am I going to do with this? And I immediately kind of dive into it. I think that, looking at how you can harness that. I think that one of the things people talk about is copyright. I don't think the problem really is, I personally don't think the problem is infringing on copyright and then reselling something. I think the real problem is that individuals being able to create everything they want without having to buy anything. They pay for the AI. And a good example is what I showed you just there. I made a whole bunch of them.
You don't need to buy a Christmas card. You can make your own.
It's not just that I made a Christmas card. I made a Christmas card that is for each. I'm sending them all out today, but I made a Christmas card for my family. Every one of them got a different Christmas card that is hilarious and them. It's Santa Claus. Like I have some friends that fly airplanes, and I sent one of Santa in a jet. And then I have my dad's a lawyer, so I sent Santa as a judge, looking who's naughty and nice. My mom is from Arizona, so I put it in him. He's got a coach. He's driving a stagecoach with in the Sonora Desert, and so there's like these I was able to make these funny. That was my theme was Santa, but in a couple hours and it wasn't like I just did it. I just typed in all these things. I worked it because I had to figure out how it was and keep on choosing it. It has a lot of trouble with glasses and glasses and hands. So you have to kind of work. You're working the solution. But I mean, if you look at like the let's see here, like my son's really into biotech, and so I let's see here, just to give you an example. So he's really into biotech. So what is Santa doing? Working on a DNA sequence. And so there you go. There's and you sit here and create these things. And what I really realized, I got the hands right, by the way, but not the glasses are a little messed up. But anyway, the thing is that people build it being like, if I was a teacher in K through 12 or whatever, I'd be using these images all the time to show funny ideas, inspire kids, have these funny pictures come up of minions doing, whatever, firing a catapult. Now we're going to talk about physics and catapults. Working
on a math problem or something.
So that, I think that I would be constantly using these as funny images. And so I think that that's going to be the real power. And I think that it's actually scarier for many content creators because of that. Like, it's like if I would not want to own stock photography. Right now, like any investment in stock photography is in big trouble. But anyway,
unless you're going to sell your library to the AI people, and
they've already, give
them it all, and
like it's like this is this picture I did this picture a couple days ago. That's the kind of thing you see in stock photography all the time, like brain with wires or whatever. But it's better than almost most of the stock photography that I've gotten to do that. And so those are the kind of things that are there. And I think that I would look at that from that perspective. And it's going to get to a point where all this stuff is in 3, you can print it out. You can I just think I'm going to be able to eventually negotiate with the AI about what kind of stand I want, or a TV stand or a table or furniture or whatever. And to say, yeah, that's what I want. And that specialized thing is going to go out and get built and sent to me, and it's literally the way I want it. I don't think that it affects, I still need, you're still going to need specialists to come in. If you're very good at what you do, this is the other thing, is if you're very good at what you do, you're not, and you keep on innovating. The AI is not going to get there anytime soon. It'll eventually make your job easier, because you'll take all the little doodads that you've been doing and let the AI do that part. And then you'll really work on it, but you really have to get past the skill and into the eye. It's your vision of what's there that's important, and being able to tie that in and be able to be precise about it. But it's going to be like another tool that we use. But I think it's really, we'll spend another hour on it. We should probably think about doing an AI for educators, like how to use AI effectively for educators is probably a subject that's a good Saturday at some point.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited about it. I know that I'm in lots and lots of discussions, people talking about the ethics and the legality and the, all those other things. But when we get past that, we just have to realize that this is going to be something that is going to be really interesting, and it's going to make a lot of lives. If you're making content, you have to figure out how it affects you. But weavers were very upset when we started being able, the scribes got put out of business real quick. Not real quick, but over years when the printing press started, and weavers, had a problem when they started bringing in larger things. There's this technology has displaced people. Technology has displaced people for thousands and thousands of years, and so we know that that's going to happen. We have to figure out what to do with that. If you don't want to be displaced, fighting it is not going to be the way to. It's not the way to not be replaced. It's figuring out how to use it in what you're doing and leverage it and get ahead. Next question.
Andy Kokendorfer from Vieira, Florida asks, how do you deal with an HDCP signal when you need a non-copy protected signal for switcher, etc.? Thanks.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, the HDCP is basically the handshake on an HDMI connector that talks to the device that's supplying the signal. Is this okay to send it? And usually we use an EDID or EDID device that sits in line there and fakes the device into thinking that it's sending it to a monitor or something else like that. You basically set it. It's called the sync, essentially. And you set that signal, and then you plug them together, and when the device goes looking for a handshake, it sees that EDID information and says, okay, I'll send that through.
Yeah, there's a bug, we'll just call it a bug, in a lot of relatively inexpensive Chinese HDMI to SDI converters that come out of China. The AVUE has this bug. And that bug is that it's not really a bug. It's just that it does the handshake for HDMI, but SDI doesn't have HDCP. So if you convert from HDMI to, if you take one of these, they'll handshake as a HDCP, and then they will pass the signal over SDI out, and they're about $80, and they work. so that'll just on the way through. So not that we've ever had to do that. I mean, a lot of times we end up with people who want to present things that are their own content, and you have to make sure that you're not going to get caught up with a HDCP signal. Next question.
John Foldson, Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania, asking, Keynote recently renamed Instant Alpha, to remove background. It's likely easier for non-video folks.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I could testify to that. It actually is easier to sort of comprehend. I'm just going to take out the background, and if it's a generic color, then Instant Alpha always was able to take it out. I've been a Keynote user since the beginning when it was first released, and it's had this feature, I think, in the second iteration or so, and I've used it all the time. And I only recently went looking for Instant Alpha and found it's now called Remove Background. And I got the feeling that makes more sense, that those of us who work in alpha channels and have graphic backgrounds aren't the same people. And getting Keynote more adopted by having simpler understanding is going to move it forward, I think.
You go, John.
I wonder how many previous PowerPoint users got into Keynote and said, well, I can't use this because it doesn't have remove background. And how much of that played into changing the name of the tool that's been there all along?
It's quite possible. Would you say that the remove background on PowerPoint is as good as Keynote's?
You can do some more fine-tuned things in PowerPoint. It is not as good for a quick fix, and it doesn't generally get worse outcomes in PowerPoint. Right.
Yeah, I that's what I felt. I just didn't know, as talking to an expert of PowerPoint or someone who knows a lot more about than I do. I was curious because I've that's been one of my problems of when I do PowerPoint stuff. It's trying to figure that out, and I'm always like, oh, it's not quite, and I can't quite get to where I am with Keynote.
PowerPoint's quite a bit simpler, or gotten quite a bit better in the last 3 years, I would say.
Yeah, what were you gonna say, Dave?
Well, I was going to say that it was, for me, easy to understand in Instant Alpha to drag the mouse a little bit and sort of carve out the background. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't get that with PowerPoint. But as John said, there's other tweaks that you can use.
Next question.
James Fosline in Minneapolis, Minnesota asks, in a location scout, along with doing a photo LiDAR type scan of the space, what steps can you do to test audio? Is there a high-tech hand clap?
Go ahead, Mitch.
Essentially, testing audio is called an RT60. There are many devices, including apps for your phone, that'll send an impulse out and then measure the reflections.
I go, Dave.
I was taught by a very great engineer in audio that when I'm going to go into a room and test it for what it will sound like on a microphone, I just plug one ear. And now I have a microphone. And the universal sort of sound is invisible to our both ears because we mentally tune it out. Our brain does that to figure out how far things are. And when you turn off one ear, you can actually hear what the room actually sounds like. Then you choose the microphone or the placing of the microphone according to what those sounds are. And that's a non-tech, there's no device to buy or scan that you have to do. It's simply a listen to the room differently and then hear the room as it really is.
Yeah, the what we do if we want to reproduce it or build that model later is to we cycle through the entire range. So you hear this and you can run that and record it and get some modeling from that. Other things that are done are for modeling is recording a balloon pop or creating some large impulse. And if you have something that knows what that means, those are some other ways to actually model what you're actually looking at there. And there's some programs in some companies, and there's companies that actually rebuild those kinds of things. When I'm walking in, kind of a little like what Dave's talking about, I click a lot. So you'll see me, I'll walk in. The first thing I do when I'm going to go into and to me, I know what that means. Like if I do that, you'll see me just click while I walk into something. I'm doing that because I just know what that means to me about how roomy a room is. And so that tends to be what I do. Next question.
Next question from Douglas Carmichael asking, after you've gotten the model geometry by whatever means, what software would you use for the actual pre-visualization process? Would it be a real-time engine like Unreal Engine or Unity?
Go ahead, Mark.
So in our case, we start out by taking the information, whether it's a design or an existing situation, and we put that into Autodesk's Revit, which is a building information modeling software. Then we go into 3ds Max to make it a virtual space to do a walkthrough or something. But that's because we're in the Autodesk world. For the stage stuff that we're starting to do, we probably will go to something like Unity or Unreal Engine, just because it seems to be better suited and the cameras can talk to it.
In the past, we've done a lot of it with Unity. We are looking at using Unreal Engine for some of those things, and I've used mostly Cinema 4D. You could also use Blender. Those are all things that are viable to build these things out and then get them back into Unreal or Unity. It'll be really interesting to see where Apple goes with it. I think that Apple was building a relationship with Unreal, and Epic kind of poured a lot of water on that with their lawsuits. And the question we really have is, will Apple, as they go into AR, VR, XR, will they embrace Unity or will they build their own tools? And I don't think any of us know what's going to happen next there. But they're not going to use Unreal. so that's while I invest some in Unreal, I worry that any investment I make there will end up not being as useful on the platform. Next question.
Next in from James Fosline in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Your big flat monitors seem to be a weak point with sound treating a podcast studio. Would it make sense to create a setup design when being on air without being surrounded by monitors?
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, that's an interesting question in the sense that this problem was solved long before we had big flat monitors. Back in the day when you had an audio booth, it often had a window, and you were cued outside the window in your nice quiet room when you did your voice work. And the rejection of a dynamic mic with a cardioid shape allowed us to hear just the voice and not the window. So we're getting the same thing, and that's recommended here at Office Hours all the time. Use a dynamic microphone if you can, and a cheap one, and also use the cardioid pattern so that you're not hearing the other side of the microphone.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
The other thing in Dave's example is that a lot of those studios had windows that were angled down. So they were sort of, if you looked at them side on, they'd be like this. They'd be on an angle on either side because angle of incidence equals angle of reflectance. So if you have a big monitor in front of you, I have mine toed in ever so slightly so the sound goes the other way instead of straight back at me and then back into the mic.
And for our folks on the back end, we're going to run a little over because we don't have a subject for the second hour. So and we've got still some questions sitting here and not a ton of questions in education yet. So we're just going to run a little over. So just note that. Next question.
Paul Terry Wallace from Austin, Texas, asking, what are the hottest tech toys for the Christmas season for kids and for adults?
I'm going to go with Jesse.
Darius has been having so much fun with the phonograph. We are getting him an audio cassette recorder.
Very good. It's funny how we go into a retro. My daughter wants a record player, so to use there. So that is so that we are taking a look at that. I find that for me, Midjourney has been one of the things that I've been really fascinated by as far as sending out cards that, as I've already shown you, and again, my daughter and son both are making things for a lot of people. And I think that's, I don't know, I'm a real big fan of making stuff. Go ahead, Nigel.
So we got for the holidays some real good speakers and an amp, and we're re-enjoying 2-channel music like it was a new thing.
Next question.
Next question in from Jason Sipe from Muravetta, California. I have a BlackMagic Hyperdeck Studio 12G 2015 with a bad capacitor. Is it worth the trouble to replace the individual capacitor, or should I look at replacing the entire unit with an upgrade?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
A lot of those devices have surface-mounted technology, and BlackMagic is very good at doing that. It's not quite as easy as you think to be able to remove components from a circuit board where they're all embedded into the circuit board itself.
I think the one thing to also look at is whether whether it has XLR in and out. Note that the new ones that BlackMagic sells do not have XLR in and outs, and if that 12G does, I can't remember whether the 12G had it or not, but the Pros definitely had it. If they do, then that's a more complicated thing because you may want those. And so we have a little bit of both. We have some of the brand new ones at 09, and then we have the older ones. And we use the older ones sometimes because we have those individual XLR in and outs. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, the real-time VFX tool Notch, and there's a link to it, was used for the Queen plus Adam Lambert tour, but the content was played back from a disguised GX2 media server. Has anyone worked with one?
The Sky stuff is used in a lot of shows. So I mean, it's probably well known to the people who are building it about what it should actually look like. Not just something that I just really want to bring those guys in and take a look at because it looks like a really interesting app. And we just haven't been, we haven't been able to quite line up with getting them in, but we're going to definitely bring them in and have them show it off. It looks pretty cool. Next question.
Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts has a question. My apologies. I have another question I'm going to read first. Jesse Kester in Glendale asked a question. Errors and omissions. It wasn't the star trying to sue the studio. It was a pair of fans who rented the movie on promises of a particular star.
Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, so the movie, by the way, is Yesterday, which is a great film, and I'm sorry they didn't enjoy it. The fact that their favorite star wasn't in really a fairly insignificant scene in all of it is a bit sad, and I would just say if you've never seen Yesterday, it's worth watching with or without her. If you like the sort of thing about time is what we watched last night. It's one of our favorite movies. And if you still are going to movies based on the trailers, then you have a different problem.
Who was the person that was missing?
It was Anna de Arnis or something. There's a scene in Yesterday where the key character's on the James Corden show. Yeah. She was the other guest on the James Corden show. And by the way, if you go to YouTube, you can find it. It's a deleted scene. It just, of all the things, it seemed like a very strange thing for me. But people are people.
Sorry. Okay. And she doesn't seem like the kind of actress that would be bothered by it. She's probably like, well, I got my check. It's not.
If you go to IMDb, she's not even in the credits for the film.
Right. And as someone who I've worked on lots of shots that don't make it into movies, like I worked on the shots for weeks that got cut out on the editing floor, and you just kind of like, well, that's what happens. I mean, you don't, it's you want to enjoy that moment and then move forward. Next question.
Next one in from Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts. Has anyone added actions to their Stream Deck specific to office hours, either as a producer or panelist?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I don't use my Stream Deck as much as I thought I would. One thing I do use it for frequently is I use the app Presentify for telestration, and I use that for shortcuts to change my brush and colors and that sort of thing.
Go ahead, John.
I created it for office hours. It's been useful outside of office hours, and that is I have a button to autofocus. So I can just press it, and it focuses my camera for me. Just requires a macro.
Nice. I think the last question for the first hour. Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, in an article about Jean-Michel Jarre, it mentions that he has a DiGiCo SD7 live console in his studio. When you want a studio console for studio work, considering the DiGiCo consoles have no DAW control capability.
I think it probably has to do with Jean-Michel's choice of what he wants. What he's comfortable with is probably has more to do with it. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, yeah, and DAW can be added later. Recording things and capturing performances and tracking layers and all that stuff can be done on these other consoles and not go into a DAW right away. The habit of starting with DAW and always working in DAW is just recent. Right. And Jean-Michel has been around for a very long time, so he's probably married to that box.
Yeah. And then now, are we? I haven't hosted the education second hour for a while. Are we taking a break now, or are we keep moving, or how do we?
Yeah.
What's the plan? I know I threw everybody off because I said we're going to go over because we did. I was like, well, we don't have something specific.
Today, we're going to take a look at what educators expect from Education Hour. We'll be asking them about their expectations for the show as we prepare future episodes. Great. And if everyone stays with us through a little break, we'll prepare our program and settle our new panelists into their chairs. And Education Hour starts in just a little while.
Excellent.
Need to step away for just 1 second.
Chad, I'm going to stay on. I didn't click the question originally because I thought I'd have to go, but I can stay now.
I will be absent from the second hour, but I look forward to seeing it on YouTube. Bye-bye.
Welcome to Education Hour. You know, we often have discussions during the week about what we think would be interesting to people who visit us for Education Hour, and we sometimes get input from our panelists and other office hours regulars. But today I thought we might put out a tray of virtual donuts and have a wider conversation about Education Hour itself. Are you getting what you hope to see on Education Hour? Are we addressing the needs of our producers? Are there other areas of focus going forward that would be interesting to our audience? And we're going to have a sort of open discussion today, take a lot of questions as they come up, and just see what kind of future we have for Education Hour. John and I often meet together and go over ideas and try and read the tea leaves about what we think people would be interested in and how it relates to training, teaching, and education. But sometimes we need more and wider input, and this is the opportunity for people who are visitors to our show and producers asking questions. Put your questions to us. Ask us for things that you think should be part of Education Hour and things we might look into. As well, of course, if there are any guests that you think you wanted to see on the show and you have some contact information for them, we'd love to get that information on the chat. So if we get started here with the people who are already with us on the panel, we'll go around the circle here and start with John and have a little chat about what is the future of Education Hour.
Thanks, Dave. One thing that I'm curious about is our producers, which weeks are the most helpful to them, including, is it something that, the purpose of Education Hour is to help educators, and that's any educator, whether it's someone who's in a classroom, which I think has traditionally been our largest audience on Saturdays, or corporate training like myself, or someone who just has to help someone else understand information. All of us are educators to some level. So I think my question for our producers is, what has been especially helpful and what areas have been less helpful or less value added?
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? No? Okay. Let's take a couple of questions here and start things off.
All right. Our first question comes from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. EduProtocols seem to be a form of gamification in education. What are the panelists' thoughts on these concepts?
Well, I'll start with you, John.
Yeah, gamification is any attempt at adding complexity or adding challenge to a given task in order to trigger the fun response in people, I would say. The difference between a game and not a game is you add extra steps and extra rules in place. And I think some of the protocols in the EduProtocols do help apply gamification to education, but gamification is much, much, much larger. And it can be everything from as simple as, well, last time I was able to do this in 30 seconds and now I want to try to do it in 25, is a form of gamification. It's a way to motivate yourself to achieve a task by making it a little bit more challenging for yourself.
Okay, Harshid?
I feel that with having the protocols, a lot of things that kind of stuck out to me is repetition. So having a gamification aspect of it, and sometimes even as adults, we might not realize we're playing a game or we're doing something that's repetitive like that, but it's the rinse, repeat, recycle sort of type of series of movement. So I think that with something that was introduced in a different a way to me that I'm not used to, it was a refreshing topic for one, and as well as what retained in the whole process, right? So I think that this could be a good way to, even for creators or anybody else, to use this in other aspects.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a good point. Is the repetition of it was part of the suggestion of gamification, but in fact, it was something teachers do all the time is go over a subject and then come back to that subject or expand on that subject as they repeat themselves. Alex?
I think that the thing that I'm always caught up in when I get into a lot of the different methodologies related to this is that that one of the things that we're doing with trying to teach people things is give them something that we try to make it more fun to eat our vegetables. How do we do that? And I think that I was never, I always took on, I've talked about this in the past, the dessert first, which is like, I'm just going to show you how it's used. And I think that my leaning is always, how do we get people doing whatever needs to be done, and then not knowing how to do it with the tool, and then because it creates now I need these tools to do it. And so, like, for instance, one example is that a school, and I just read this and I don't know where it came from. It's been years and years and years. They had a physics challenge that you are going to use a trebuchet to fire a trebuchet, and it had a limit, like it could only be 5 feet by 5 feet by 5 feet or something like that. It had, couldn't make a huge trebuchet. They had to build one, and they could only fire it once. And so they had to do all the math to figure that out. And the students said they learned more math in because they would keep on asking the teacher, well, how do I figure this out? How do I figure out the trajectory? How do I figure out the forces? How do I figure out? And the teacher just kept on handing them what they needed as they needed it. But it was a challenge that they were insufficient for when they were given the challenge, and they had to solve the problem. And then they're asking for all the things that okay, I don't understand how am I going to figure this out? And then all the discussions were around an applied challenge for them, rather than, you're going to study something and write a paper, or we're now going to figure out how to drill physics, calculate, this math equation in. You just needed to use it. And I think that we've lost a lot of that. And I think a lot of it has to do, we've isolated a lot of learning away from what that knowledge is actually useful for. And that makes it very hard to remember, and it makes it very not fun to learn. And so I think that's the kind of thing that I think that we need to think more about, is how do we, gamification's fine, but how do we, I think what I would say is application. As human beings, and I've been saying this a little bit because I've really been thinking about it a lot. We've learned in the last 100,000 years, and from the time we're born, to watch people ask questions, try it, repeat. Like that is the fundamental way to acquire knowledge. And some people are better at theoretical stuff than others, but almost everybody is like, our wiring is designed to watch, ask questions, try, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, and just get better at things. And I think school is kind of fallen away from that a little bit. And I think that there's an opportunity to bring that back.
It occurred to me with people talking about gamification that nursery rhymes were a way of passing on information to children, cautions about strangers or witches in the woods or any of these things. And they were practical applications and they were put into songs and poems and even little dances and games. So we've always been trying to put it in a form that will stick with people. And memorization is just a modern thing where it's almost an industrial process. Mark Giuliani?
So that's a very good point. So I'm going to bring radio into this. One of the ways to get a message to stick into someone's mind is by connecting an emotion with a thought. And that's done sometimes even by a bed of music. And once you get that repetition over and over again, that message will stick in that piece of someone's mind. So you get a piece of real estate in someone's mind. And like Alex said, you can sit there and have someone tell you something over and over and over again, but until you actually try and do it, 1,000 questions won't come up that will come up once you say, well, how do I really get from here to here? How do I really do the next step when I really don't even know where the part is? So
Right.
I think that whole process of going through, and let me tell you, it happens in architecture and the education of architects, because they're told how to design something, they're told how buildings go together, but until they get out on the construction site and they see, that person out there putting that beam together can't get their hand in there to get that wrench to that nut to tighten that. So all of this is all about experience and all about being able to do something yourself to come up with all those questions that have to be answered.
John Pruitt.
It's been a very long time since I've been in a classroom teaching. And I came through the education program, and we did not have tools at our disposal like gamification. Making learning fun really wasn't what they were teaching me in the 90s on how to teach children. And I really, while what Alex is saying is very true about repetition and engaging and challenging them and making them do things to learn, we didn't have things to gamify. We didn't understand how to make things fun for the kids. We kind of were just thrown out there and told to do it. And I really wish that we had had tools like this and concepts like this at our disposal in the classroom.
Mm-hmm. John.
Yeah, a lot of cognitive science has been developed in the last, especially 20 years, ever since we had the ability to do functional MRI studies, which allows us to study human brains while they're still alive. And so most of our research previous to, especially 2003 to 2005 or so, when those started being popular, was basically just guessing and based off of results. Our current educational system right now is somewhat incentivized to focus on testing scores, and there's a whole host of reasons for that. And every educational conversation eventually ends up in testing, just like every Wikipedia article ends up in philosophy. So I'm trying to avoid just going into testing, but we now have a good, strong understanding of cognitive science and what happens in human brains. And so that's why many times educators use these tools is we're trying to build what's called cognitive schemas in children's brains, because if you go to that architecture site with no understanding at all, with no schema, no structure, then your brain doesn't know what it should be trying to learn. And so it's a delicate balance between the conceptual frameworks and the applicable frameworks, and merging those two together and moving that information from short-term memory into long-term memory. And so we've developed these different systems and tools, some more effective than others, to try to do all of these things in order that human brains can learn. And part of it is we're just trying to jam so much more now into a school day than when I was a kid in the 90s. I did reading, writing, math, social studies, and science. And now there's a whole lot more curricula that we've added to that. So there's less time per topic to do those repetition and rote. So we're trying to be more efficient by gaming the human brain, for lack of a better term, and making sure learning goes quickly and efficiently.
Well, and I think one question is, do we need to do all that extra stuff?
And is it good? I think is the other question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the. I mean, we started to use school as. I mean, I as a parent. I mean, as someone who went to school, who has taught at schools, and who has kids in school right now. I really feel like we are just filling their plate with a bunch of stuff that isn't going to be that useful for them. And that we're now, and it creates an enormous amount of stress. It makes school not very fun. I personally have an opinion that, after watching my kids and my experience as well, is that homework should never be graded. Like, homework is, we're going to talk about things in class. Here's a bunch of things for you to research to make it better. But we're not going to grade your homework. We're just going to tell you things you could do at home if you wanted to. But we're not going to, that is, if you're a smart kid, you don't have to hand in a bunch of stupid, busy work. Related to this, you'll show that you know it in class. You'll show that you know it in the test. You'll show that you know it in projects. But most of those should be executed during the day. And you can do things at home if you need to. But I just watch the sheer volume that my kids get in homework. They have other things. I grew up as someone who had other things to do when I got home, that I didn't, and those things were, I was doing college level math to do trajectories, and I was doing, a lot of other things. It wasn't that I wasn't doing learning. I just wasn't and I think that I look when my kids come home and they have things that I don't know the answer to. What I immediately go to is, they probably don't need to know it either. So if I don't know it, they don't need to know it after 40 years. It probably isn't that applicable, to their day-to-day life. And I feel like, for instance, I read a lot of research papers, and I am always amazed at how little people who write government papers and research papers and educational papers have use Strunk and White. Strunk and White is this little. My kids got it when they were 8.
Mm-hmm.
Like, welcome, you're 8 years old. This is the only thing you need to know from English. like this is like if you leave with one thing that makes you better at English, it's this one little booklet that shows you sentence structure. And we often talk about a Strunk and White pass. Like I'll write something and then I'll just go through and try to get rid of. I play a game. We talk about gamification, getting rid of every passive verb in the like every is, every was, every like I be. All that stuff I try to get rid of, and I try to restructure every sentence back into something that is active verbs. And it's hard, but that's the thing. But that's a skill that obviously a lot of people don't have or don't try at. And I think that I don't know if a kid that hates English, I don't know if they need to have more than the structure. If someone who hates math, I don't know if they need to know more than algebra. Like, I don't know if we need to keep on having them take trigonometry, geometry, calculus classes if they're obviously not interested in it, because they're not going to remember it. It's just we're just piling on something that they're not going to use, rather than giving them more time back to do things that they are interested in, and I think and I think that public schools have to figure out a way, if we're talking about public schools, but anybody has to figure out a way to structure things to sort what people want rather than constantly stuffing their head with things they're never going to remember after that year.
Well, we're preparing people for a world that doesn't yet exist, right? I mean, we're working with past ideas of how the world operates, and we're not pushing ourselves to create.
I think the worst part is we're just filling
people
time
for this world.
We're just filling up stuff that because you don't. I don't know. I don't feel like you need the knowledge until you need it. Like what you need to figure out is, knowing how to Google is way more important than oftentimes. There you go. The elements of style. There it is.
Well, that's that critical thinking question, isn't it? Roscoe Jones actually in the chat says Science Olympiad had the kind of event and many more where you take what you know and create a practical explanation for it, or a science fair where you do a project as a team and put something out there and demonstrate your knowledge. We don't have many opportunities for kids to demonstrate their knowledge, or even university students to demonstrate what they know.
But they could. I mean, it's the structure we've given them to do that. Yeah. Like we took home ec out. Cooking is chemistry that you can eat. And we should be making things like, and I guess I feel like I personally, I've talked about this before, but I think all K through 12 should be making things and then learning tangentially why those things work. But, then we come out with kids that can actually cook and do things. I think there's a lot of conspiracy theory about why we don't do that, because it makes them better consumers.
We'll teach them how to cut down trees and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, but but how to use wood and how to use and how to, anyway, so I think that those things are going to be more important as how kids learn becomes more diffuse. Like we're seeing a massive shift in where kids are going to school.
Well, McLuhan called it Cydia's Classroom, which was a book he wrote for teachers about what's going to happen. And we're seeing it now. The Cydia is teaching kids more than they're getting inside the classroom. John?
Yeah, I agree that I don't feel like generally grading homework is helpful. And I always thought that I would be the kind of parent with the kind of kids who just learn stuff quickly because school came easy for me. And the fact is, not everyone has those kids. Not every brain is the same. And my children are bright, caring children who need to do their homework or else they don't retain the information. And so is that the solution for every child? No, but one of our problems with the educational system is we've designed a one-size-fits-all approach to different brains. And so for my kids, they need that homework. In fact, we actually assign them more homework. The trick is trying to they don't learn well the way the teacher teaches always. And so I have to, thankfully, I understand how people learn. So I have to kind of restructure the training for my kids for their math. And it's getting to the point where they're getting into the math that you don't use every day. Like, who cares what an isosceles triangle is? I'm sure it matters to somebody, but it doesn't matter to me or them. And it's harder for me to be motivated to do that reinforcement with them. But that's my kids, and it's different than someone else's.
I have a story I tell quite a lot about being a project manager on a major Defense Department program, and we were solving a problem and making simulator dials on an aircraft move smoothly. And one of my programmers almost had to do an in-service with all the other programmers. We had about 6 of them. And they were all having trouble figuring out how to make this work. And this woman we had as our programmer said, well, it's just a quadratic. And they all gave her this blank look because they understood the term. They weren't sure how it applied to this particular problem. And she went to the whiteboard and said, okay, here's the quadratic. And you plug in this figure here. And then the machine, of course, these are computers, so they'll calculate what it is. And the position will just move dramatically from one place to the other quite smoothly. And she showed how she'd done it on one of her instruments. And they all adopted this, we're using quadratics. I get it now. And then they went to work and everything came out just beautifully at the end. But to remind somebody who was in his mid-20s or early 30s that they haven't used a quadratic in 20 years, well, yeah, because this was the first time they'd ever seen an actual explanation that included it. So I think that's also necessary, is to say, where are you going to use this information? And this is why you need to know it. So I'm going to move to the next question here.
Can't hear you.
Still muted. Next question is from Craig McFarlane from Boston, Massachusetts. What are your thoughts about accelerated learning technology for individuals, such as language learning or memorization? How do you think chatting with an AI-based expert could help?
Oh, you've started something here. We're all going to talk AI for 10 minutes here. Go ahead, Alex. You start.
Well, I think AI is going to make a big difference in education in general. I think you're going to end up with a lot of things. I think that we talked about it a little bit before in the last hour, but just the teachers being able to put images that inspire the kids up that they made out of Midjourney is going to be something that's, not educational, but it is going to be things that are that get kids excited about stuff and can be fun images. That's the first step, doing those things. So, again, I did something that I talked about earlier with the minions crossing the Delaware.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this thing where I go through Midjourney. I'm doing minions through history, and so I have minions on dinosaurs, and I have minions running. Like all these like pictures of it that I'm just having fun with. And as a teacher, I could see myself just deciding it's minions or it's deciding it's something else. It happens to be that Midjourney does minions really well. But I could also see one of the things that I've already started using with office hours is I'll go up to ChatGPT and I'll go, give me a bunch of, tell me how Dolby Vision works. Not because I don't know it, because it's that it will say things that are concise and it will put things together and, oh yeah, it's a good way to say that, or I didn't think about that. Or I'll ask it to ask me a bunch of questions as a teacher. It'll ask me, I'll say, ask, 20 questions about this subject. And then that lets me think about things that I want to put in, like, oh, I want to answer that question. I need to cover this. So I find it as a kind of a co-pilot. I find it to be really interesting. I think that you could get into a position where ChatGPT or something else, or something that has voice, text to voice, could be talking to you. And so a lot of times in the intercambio style of I could talk to something and it would talk back to me if I was learning a language could be a pretty interesting way for it to work that allows us to not have to have a human on the other side every single time we want to try to, just have simple conversations. And so I think that there's a lot of them. I'm not a big fan of memorization, except for the fact that I think that there are there's certain things I'm really glad I memorized. The number one most useful thing that I memorized when I was a kid was my times tables. And we had a race to talk about gamification, who could do it the fastest. Literally do the whole times table up to 12 times 12. And that is the one skill that I use every day. Like from school, like if someone asks me, like, what did you learn? Being able to do that in my head,
even with recipes, yes,
yeah. You're able to cut through just simple math really fast.
Fractions and multiplication, yeah, totally memorized. Yeah. Chris Clark has reminded us that most adult learning involves remembering, reinterpreting, and reorganizing things we already know. John?
Yes, and as far as accelerated learning technologies, I think it's very easy for us to confuse achievement with learning. In other words, I passed a level on an app, and now I've learned that thing. And that is not true. Learning happens when you're able to take the information that you've encoded into your long-term memory and apply it to real life. And for that, I think these AI tools can be incredibly helpful, because instead of just re-saying rote phrases like in language learning, you can actually interact with a language model in that native language. And it could analyze your rate of speech, your dialect, and your accent if it was trained well enough. And that can give you the kind of feedback you need to say, can I do this practically in a way that forces your brain to create new information and generate new ideas and thoughts from what you've learned previously instead of just repeating what you've heard?
What I've heard people talk about in ChatGPT is the fact that it can remember the previous part of a conversation and bring that back. You can modify your request on a second or third question, and it'll remember what you originally asked. And I think that's like language, what do they call it? Natural language they want to program into these things. And if they get very good with natural language, it would be a tutor system. It would be a way of taking material they need to work on and maybe repeat or maybe even practice. And language labs are just this sort of thing where you record yourself saying something and then the machine plays it back and compares that with what's right, and then you learn to change your intonation. Well, in the sense that AI is already a natural language engine, it might actually be good for that sort of learning. I can think of other repetitions such as, pilots have to inspect the aircraft and they have a 200-point list that they have to go through in their head, and they have to memorize this thing in order to climb into their plane and fly. And this would be also a way of getting that practice on a laptop rather than doing it with aircraft in person. John Pewitt next.
The one concern I have with using something like chat AIs or things like that for education purposes is we cannot understand how the models work once they're complex enough. We do not have a way to understand how the connections have been made, and we can't be predictive in what the bots are going to say, which is not normally a problem. But if you have a clever child who is deliberately malicious, you can make chatbots do things that you would not want them to do, and a human would recognize, whereas a dumb machine will just simply execute. So we can't replace teachers with AIs, at least not yet. But I think that as a supplement, as long as the teachers are paying attention and not using it to check out of the classroom, then I think it's a good tool.
There was an experiment run in the early 80s with online, and it was text-based, so it wasn't a voice or an interaction that was human, but it was a text-based interface for psychology. You could have a therapist at the other end of the line, and it wasn't a person, it was a computer, and it was programmed to see key words that are related to how you're feeling or what you're having trouble with. And they were pretty successful in giving people self-confidence about their problem. Being able to reflect to a device what your problem is helped you figure out what your solution was. And the difficulty psychologists had with it is that psychology is not meant to give you the answer, it's to help you find the answer. And teachers are often doing that too. They're not necessarily going to give you the answer, they're going to help you find the answer. But it was not as elegant, I guess, a way of doing things, because the same sort of pattern existed in the machine, and you were almost having to fit yourself into the pattern to get any good results from it. And this was a concern I had about ChatGPT when I first saw people talking about it. I was afraid it was teaching us how to ask the questions in a certain way to get answers we thought we understood. So I think there can be, like you're saying, John, there can be a downside to this in that someone gets a new skill, which is how to detect AI's interactions or how to conform your own behavior to suit the AI. And of course, as John Preto's telling us, he's ready to be the pet of an AI system. Well, let's move to the next question.
The only thing I'll say, I just want to say one thing about that is that I dance with the AI all the time. Like I'm not trying to not do it. I'm trying to figure out how it wants to get information. So as a user, I'm just trying to figure out what language it's talking, what language is it talking in, and how do I speak that language? And so all of my tests are all related to that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next question is?
Next question is from Bob Sturdivant from San Antonio. I've been thinking over the past years is the lack of how to learn something without better remembering tools. I run into the learning curve, but have a bigger problem with the remembering curve. What techniques do you use to teach remembering?
You start us off, John.
So,
Sorry, which
we
John?
got two Johns. I'll take John Snyder first. Sorry about that. It's my fault.
Thanks, Dave. Sorry, John. Basically, the act of remembering is reinforcing your brain wiring, but the connections between neurons. And how you do that is you first connect new information to old information. So if you can relate something new you've learned to something in the past, it'll help you walk that same pathway more often. Use spaced repetition, so repeat information over a long period of time. That will again reinforce that pathway. Use active recall. Force yourself to try to remember something without aid. So don't look at your notes when you quiz yourself. Confidence-based assessment is ask yourself, how confident am I in this information? And if you're not confident, but you get the answer right, that means that you need to continue to repeat it. If you're confident and you get the answer wrong, it means you need to restart your learning path. Those three practices end up combining together into something called deliberate practice. So intentionally practicing and looking at feedback on yourself will help you remember things.
Now, John Pruitt.
sorry about that. So I'm not a professional educator these days, but in my role as lead engineer, I have to teach people how to use our tools. And so my tricks for doing that is I kind of like to throw my junior engineers into the deep end. And so I will put them in front of a console and on Zoom and say, okay, show me what you want to do. And then as they're making mistakes, I'm like, I will gently prod them to the right course. But I may even show them the first time, this is how I do it. It's not the only way to do it. If you find a way that works better for you, do it your way. Now that I've shown you, you show me how to do it the next time. And then I have them repeat it until they can do it smoothly. And that's how I do it, how I make it interesting and keep them engaged. I also make sure that that's the way that they learn, that's their learning style, because not everybody, some people prefer to read, in which case I can point them at the manuals. But I personally dive into stuff. I teach myself how to do this. And it's kind of, that's my learning style, is to just go in there and do things. Mm-hmm. So that's what how I teach and how I learn.
Oh, okay, Alex.
I make no attempt to remember anything. So like I write things down. I know where I refer to them. I keep track. I put things in notes. I have my notes. I probably add 10 notes a day to things that I can search. I remember things that I use often, and I forget things that I don't use very often, and I don't care. Like I just, I don't want to fill up my head with a bunch of stuff trying to remember it. I just put it somewhere that it needs to be, or I have sometimes a support system of people around me that know what it is. But, a lot of times I don't make any, I think that we don't need to remember everything, and so I don't make any attempt to do that.
Sure. Yeah. I try and have my assistant do all that. So
I just think I just find it clutters up my head. It clutters up my head trying to remember everything. If I just let it, I can think faster. If I just grab onto the things that I need, I know where to find them, but I don't necessarily know where they are.
Yeah, there's some risks involved in that. But anyway, John Snyder.
Yeah, just a quick word on learning styles. There's no hard evidence that learning styles are an effective way of educating others. It helps people feel like they learned, or it helps them feel like they are more confident than they should be. All the evidence-based practices are leading us away from using, especially the 4 learning styles: visual, audio, kinetic, and I forget what the 4th one was.
Kinetic is physical. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's go to the next question then.
Our next question is from Jason Sipe from Murrieta, California. Many high school and college students heavily utilize ChatGPT to write essays. What should educators do to harness and utilize this technology alongside their students in the classroom?
This is part of the larger discussion in almost every area. People writing reports for the government or whatever, and using ChatGPT to try and flesh out things and make them look substantial. I think it's an emerging thing that we're all going to have to see more of what it does to what we ask of it, and then see whether or not there should be maybe some, what are we going to call them, on the roads. What do you have? These guardrails. There we go. I'm thinking of guardrails that keep us from veering off and getting into immorality and other things that ChatGPT may be used for. We'll start with John Snyder.
What I would do if I was a teacher in a classroom is I would allow my students to use ChatGPT, and I would have a conversation about how it's not necessarily a reliable source of information. After that, I would have the actual assignment be to give a presentation about the information in class where your peers can ask you questions, because the ability to present and respond to questions, I think, is a much more valuable skill set than the ability to write a paper in today's modern world.
Mark Giuliani.
So in the not too distant futures, teachers will take the answers students have given them, feed them into ChatGPT, and say, who wrote this? And ChatGPT will say, I wrote this 10 minutes ago.
There are actual websites that college professors use to look for plagiarism, and they're quite comprehensive, that they can scan a document, maybe just 4 paragraphs from some paper, and find on the web where that original thing was and whether the person just cut and pasted it in or not. And this has found some really significant cheating going on at some of the lower colleges. John Pewitt.
So I really like what John Snyder had to say because it really played into what I was thinking about. You need to demonstrate that turning in a paper doesn't really demonstrate that you have the knowledge and you understand what you wrote. What it demonstrates is that you can take things other people have written, put connecting sentences between them, and put quotes around them and turn that in. In order to actually show that you understand it, you need to answer questions from people. And having your fellow students do it is a great way for them to learn and you to learn, because one of the ways that we learn the best is a lot of us by teaching. The other thing, there are websites out there that can, to go off of what Mark was saying, that can actually analyze visual documents or written documents to determine if an AI wrote them. And they have a high degree of success. So I think right now, and it's going to be that way for a little while, it'll probably not be that way for long. The AIs, the way they write is distinctive and very different from what a high school or college age student would write on their own. And
teachers get used to a student and they know that that's not their voice. I've seen that happen where they look at this and go, this isn't Dave. This is somebody else written this. Yeah. Are you done, John, or you got more?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh, you're done, John. Okay. Mark Giuliani.
So it's interesting. In architecture school, to get a master's in architecture, it takes your final year's 2 semesters. The first semester is a report written about what your project's going to be. So you have to do the investigation on the usage of, if it's a building. And then the second semester is spent designing the floor plans, the facade, the elevations, then the sections. So you get a full year of demonstrating you really know the knowledge. Not only can you put the pieces together, as John said, but you also have to show it on paper and then stand up and present it in front of 6 professional architects and have them basically rip it apart in front of you. And you have to be able to answer those questions.
I'm reminded that when Wikipedia first appeared, there were bans on quoting from it, and it was deemed to be an unreliable source because it was open source. And that seems to have faded away, that yes, you might cite Wikipedia, this came from Wikipedia, but the citations in Wikipedia started to become more reliable, and some of the information was now acceptable as high school students or college students could quote from it. Next question.
Our next question comes from Mark Giuliani in Washington, D.C. Does a liberal arts education fit the needs of students today?
And John Pruitt will start us off.
So I represent this question very well, as I am in a highly technical career. I have a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology, and I do cybersecurity. So yes, I think a liberal arts degree in certain circumstances, I'm not saying it's the best for everybody, but for the right student, I think it's a very good option. It gives me soft skills that have helped me move my career forward. I'm better able to relate to people because of the humanities that I've studied. I have a little bit more context, and this is coming. The part of the reason why I have a degree in anthropology is I didn't really understand other people growing up, and so I figured, well, I'm failing in physics. Let me find something that will work for me. And studying people to understand how to work with them. Well, psychology is not really my mindset, and I really don't want more math. So sociology's out. Let's go with anthropology. And that was kind of my thoughts, and that's why I went that way. And interestingly enough, Chapel Hill did not offer a science degree in anthropology, so we had to go with the Bachelor of Arts. And I've since developed my career and relied heavily on what I've learned. And that's why I think a Bachelor of Arts is a fine degree to have.
It's often said that Bachelor of Arts in a liberal arts education has at its basis critical thinking and being able to associate different things and see the linkages or the buttons that connect these things together. And maybe that's the power of the liberal arts, is that when you have a broad knowledge and a more generalized interpretation of reality, you're better able to navigate within it. Just asking you, John Pruitt, what made you go into cybersecurity?
Well, I worked in IT for a long time. After college, I was kind of drifting around. Education wasn't really my thing. I kind of went that way because I was pushed that way by my family. And then I ended up in working with computers because I really have liked computers. I have a passion for computers. And about 7 or 8 years ago, my job was being outsourced. And one of my colleagues had interviewed with the current company that I'm at. They didn't like him, but he suggested me because I was a software packager, and they were looking for someone that had software packaging skills. And I've always had a passion for cybersecurity in addition to the TVs once I learned about it. I'm sorry, not TVs, computers. Because cybersecurity is just so I'm not a red team person. I don't like hacking. I'm not a hacker at heart. Yeah. No, but I love playing defense. I love it. It's just so much fun and so much challenging. It's more challenging than being on the blue team. Blue team is easy because we're dumb humans and we can make lots of mistakes. Red team is hard. I mean, blue team is hard.
Yeah. Mark Giuliani, quickly.
So I thought I would just put this question to ChatGPT. And the last paragraph, I won't read the whole thing. The last paragraph says, overall, liberal arts education provides students with a well-rounded education that helps them develop a broad range of skills that are valuable in many different careers.
There we go. Next question, please.
Our next question comes from Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. What's the ideal education topic to bring in a specialist or guest speaker? That is, topics that require and attract interest from outside the current EDU panel.
Well, it's been suggested by Chris Clark that we bring in someone who's very knowledgeable about storytelling, and that they are a good storyteller, and that how that connects to education. So that's probably an ideal topic to bring in a specialist there. We'll take any idea, I guess, for any specialist that someone wants to offer us for this, this hour. One of our difficulties in having guests is that there's probably not enough time in an hour to cover some of the subjects that our experts have. John Snyder?
I think some of the technical experts we have in office hours would be fantastic guests to help teachers understand complex technical topics. Like, for example, John, your expertise in cybersecurity, how does that apply to a teacher who's trying to teach her kids logging in, or his kids, logging in and creating a password? And why is that important? And how do we communicate that in a way that the teacher understands the importance of it so they can pass down the important parts and not just you need 18 characters, 2 symbols, and a number?
Mark Giuliani.
So I think I will second you. The storytelling is an important something important to have to communicate to people. And when I look back at my education and look at who was the most influential, it was those people that could get up and communicate well and tell stories well. And I find myself as an architect having to describe to clients how we progressed through this timeline of sitting down and doing a needs analysis, determining what the user groups needed, and that came up with this result. You need to tell a story. You need to walk them through that timeline. And that will work and help everybody in multiple careers and really focus people on the ability to communicate and get a point across to the intended audience.
Mm-hmm. Harshid?
I agree on this. And as far as educational guests and people that could assist with this, I would say somebody, let's say in the psychology space even, Georgia Dow was one that we spoke about in the past. And there are others as far as workflows. And I would like to know more workflows. So audio description, for example, is one idea that I have. But how do we take something in an educational fashion to have a presentation that anybody could pick up and then give that package deal? So John mentioned he's a software packaging specialist, as say, but how do you take a package of material as a presentation, even in education fashion, and give a person the deliverables? So sometimes we do have issues with products we might choose to do, let's say, a signature, and the website might not be accessible, and I'm not sure what documentation is trying to be portrayed. So I know that we could probably get some guests to help us with, let's say, PDF tagging that makes a PDF file accessible throughout. So just having that practice, and then in your workspace using that. So even if you're an architect, if you are a computer software engineer, you're educator, it doesn't make a difference in career fashion, but it helps our brain to retain exactly what's going to be upcoming, because as we know, ChatGPT and some of these other products are already kind of knocking at the door, but we already have been doing machine learning as we have, and language-based learning is coming up on the horizon. So let's see where we go with all of this.
Thank you. Next question.
Our next question is from Peter Belbin in Houston, Texas. With hindsight in hand, which past teachers do you recognize now as being those that were most effective in helping you learn the required subject material, and what techniques did they use to achieve that result?
Ooh, that's a toughie. I've learned so much from so many different teachers. I'm going to say writing. I think I was in grade 8 when I thought I was a good writer. And one of the teachers I had in English class we have, challenged me, I think, to say, well, are you just imitating what you understood to be good writing, or are you actually originally writing good things? And he moved me out of my safe area. I thought, I've read enough books, I know how writing works. And then he taught me that there's more to writing than that. And I finally got into the thing of, well, writing is actually a deeper water than I was treading water in. And that pointed me in the right direction. It's helped my career ever since. We'll go to Mark Giuliani.
I think the teachers that were most inspirational were those that communicated well, told stories, but also involved you in the process of learning. So there were many times when there'd be role playing, where I remember one class we had, everyone had represented a different country in the United Nations, and subjects were brought up, and you got to see all the different perspectives that those different countries had to look at things and decide which way to vote on something. So I think it's about bringing the student into it and, finding out what is in it for them. What are they going to take away from this, and how is it going to better their life?
John Snyder.
Dr. Galen Johnson was my church history and philosophy professor in college, and he would take all the readings and split them up amongst the students. And each day a student taught the class. And all he did was facilitate the conversation and discussion. And he probed us to make us think for more. And it was really helpful in my understanding of how to think, as well as church history.
And John Pewitt.
When I was in college, going back to get my teaching certificate, I spent some time, I had to take some history classes, and the history teacher there for my African American history class was I would just go to her office and sit and chat with her for hours. And that was what I found to be the most helpful. It helped me think through some of my thoughts, challenged me in some of my positions. And it was just a very good open dialogue to have with her.
That's an important part of education, is actually understanding your students. So yeah, those kind of interactions are going to be an amplifier of what goes on in learning. John Snyder?
I also just wanted to say, I think I've learned more in the last year from Dr. Chris Clark here on the panel than almost anybody else, especially about education.
Okay, with that, we'll move to the next question. We're going a little over because we got pushed off a little bit, but I'm just going to take 3 more, I think. You're muted, John.
Sorry about that.
You're too quick on the button.
Douglas
there.
Carmichael, yes. We talk about technology X or product Y, but what's the secret to creating healthy environments where not only learning can take place, but students feel safe, secure, and comfortable?
I'm not sure there's a secret to it. And healthy environments are constructed both by the people who that run the institution, administer that, and also by the attitudes of teachers and the students themselves. So students can create their own safety as well. But I'm not an expert in that kind of area, and I don't believe there's sort of a secret. But you do want them to feel safe, secure, and comfortable. So, John, you got an idea?
People learn best when they can achieve the flow state, which is developed and understood by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who was a Polish psychologist. And basically, you have 3 conditions for flow. You need instant feedback, challenging, a balance between opportunity and capacity. So it needs to be difficult for you, but not unachievable. And you need to have clear goals.
And John Pruitt.
I think being safe in the classroom is sometimes at odds with what the classroom is the teachers are required to do. And what I'm saying, the reason why I'm saying this is teachers are mandatory reporters. A lot of students, especially those that are undergoing abuse or neglect or something like that, really don't necessarily want their parents or other caretakers to get into trouble for what the children is getting. And so they feel stressed at home and they feel stressed at school for very different reasons. And I'm not sure the teacher in those situations, and I'm talking about very specific situations here, can do their job and make the child feel safe. They can make the child safe, but that's a different thing from feeling safe.
There's a phrase I drew from an author of the 20s, Vera Brittain, who said, learning is a naturally uncomfortable experience, and most people prefer to be comfortable. And so you can't always be secure or comfortable, but you can make obvious safety. When we talk about a technology or a product, I believe that a lot of administrators take into account whether or not this puts a person at risk or makes them feel uncomfortable. So I think they're observing that to some degree, but there are so many products, I guess I'll say, that it's really hard to keep track and it's really hard to administer that stuff. Next question.
Our next question is from James Babbitt in San Diego. Could you discuss how ChatGPT is more like a search engine than an AI?
Thankfully, John Pruitt's going to help us here.
So ChatGPT, basically, as I understand it, is a neural learning algorithm that has a huge database of stuff that is crawled throughout the web. And so when you ask it a question, it combs through the database almost instantaneously to create its answers, picking from things that its neural algorithms have found to be most relevant to provide the answer. And so that's why it's functioning in a way, it's not creating original content in a way. It's kind of like what we do subconsciously, taking what we've learned over the years, putting it together in a unique fashion and surfacing it to you. It's just doing it with a database that is vastly bigger than what we consciously have available to us. Subconsciously is another matter.
Well, that brings us to our next question. So let's hear from that.
Our last question is again from Douglas Carmichael. How can you assist students who have suffered trauma in their lives to feel secure in a learning environment?
Trauma is a very difficult thing to understand. And the reason I know this with such confidence is that I live with an expert who is an expert in this. My wife is a clinical psychologist with expertise in trauma and small children. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to understand how to deal with that. I also have, not revealing any secrets here, but I have a niece who suffered a serious trauma when she was 3 or 4 years old. She's now about 9, and she's going to a school that is actually run by the Native Band. And a Native Band in Canada automatically has to deal with child trauma. And so they have programs in it that are both built to handle the trauma the kid has experienced and then give them strategies for management. And they do it with the entire school, not just kid by kid. They have generic activities that they do where they go out and they do things in the woods, or they do things and build things as a group and work as a community. And they even take care of the school. So it's a whole community that has to support children who have been traumatized. And not all teachers are clear on what the nature of trauma is. And revisiting trauma is not always a good idea. There's a thing called re-traumatizing, by asking people to talk about their trauma. And it just runs them through it one more time. And people who do PTSD work have learned this a long time ago, that you can't quite get a person to feel comfortable if you ask them to leap off the cliff again. So in the sense that it's a tricky subject and it's still emerging, it's a bit like what we've been learning about teaching in general or cognitive understanding. It's emerging slowly, but I don't know if you can assist a student directly without expert help at the top levels, people who have a background in this area. John?
Yeah, I was just going to add on to that, Dave. I think for teachers, one of the most important things is recognizing when something's beyond what we can help with and having a strong network that we can reference people to, because recognizing trauma and getting the person to someone who can help them is far more valuable than almost anything else we can do in those stations.
That closes us up for today. I'm going to give a big thank you to all those people who are submitting questions today and every day. You're the community who make these discussions possible. And as well, I'd like to acknowledge all the people who volunteer every single day to operate the integrated systems of office hours and after hours, and recognize their dedication. We thank you along with today's panelists who provided really valuable insight, and thanks, panelists. It was really interesting conversation. Join us again next week. John Snyder will show us 4 ways to draw on a screen. And I want to remind people there's always after hours all day and all night, ready to lend a hand in any kind of technical or online issues you might have. After hours can get you a quick answer, most of the time, to nearly any technical question you might have. And for teachers, it's a nice resource to be able to just get quick answers for something that you're going to probably have to deal with tomorrow. So for that, catch us again next week in Education Hour. Thank you, everybody. That was really fun.
Happy holidays.
Yes, all the best to you and yours.
Thank you for hosting. It was a great show. Now I have to go eat or my blood sugars will get too low.
There you go. My second breakfast awaits me.
Thanks, Dave, for covering for me today. Really appreciate you stepping in.
Take care, says Harshid, to everybody on the panel.
Illustrating next week.
Mm-hmm.
Bring it, Harshid.
Yeah, I want to see Harshid's illustrating. That'd be fun. If it's as crazy as Alex's, then, probably makes sense.
Have a great week. See y'all later.
You too. We'll see you next Saturday.
Bye-bye.